nationwide and close to home for everything you need. About the House, sponsored by Home Value.
The current building regulations don't really reflect the amount of noise that's in a modern day.
We all know the ordeal of buying a new house. But what if you go through the whole process of bidding for the house, getting your mortgage and then finally moving in, and then you discover that it's impossible to live in? Landscaper Pat Kelly bought a semi-detached house in a new development in Kill, County Kildare, and all was going well until the neighbours moved in. Pat, you've got some big problems here with sound in your home. Can you tell us about it?
Sound coming through the not just downstairs but upstairs as well. So you get it during the course of the day, and again at night time you can hear lots of walking around. There's simple things like people closing doors.
And your neighbours are not doing anything particularly?
My neighbours, I've got to say, I've got to compliment them. They're not particularly noisy in any way. But ordinary things like walking around the house, and if they have people in at the weekend, that really accentuates the problem. Then I more or less have to go, have to leave, and come back later when hopefully everybody's left the next door.
How long is it built, by the way?
The house is built 2 years, Duncan.
And you're happy with it?
Yeah, overall, I could not find fault with the house. The finished quality is pretty good. I'm happy about that, but the sound is affecting my quality of life, essentially.
If you're affected by noise, it may cause sleep deprivation and it may cause stress. And that can be directly linked to heart disease. In fact, there's an emerging body of evidence through credible organisations like the World Health Organization that noise can be directly linked to heart disease and in effect the fatalities associated with that.
Sound levels between houses need to comply with building regulations. So Pat is having his house tested by a sound engineer to find out if it complies.
The type of noises we hear commonly are telephones, the chinking of cutlery, the chinking of plates. They can hear dishwashers being emptied, they can hear drawers being opened and closed and what have you. And that's all airborne sound. Then the other type of sound that people talk about, which is both in apartments and in houses, but it can only be tested for in apartments, and that's impact sound. Now, impact sound will be described as footfall. If you can hear somebody upstairs walking around in their room, and the vibration that they're creating is being coupled into the floor, and that is coming down into your space. But it's not coming down airborne-wise, it's actually the structure is actually physically moving.
To test the performance of the party wall between the houses, they set up a speaker that will project very loud white noise at a level of 100 decibels. Then from next door, they measure how much airborne sound transfers to the neighbour's house. Jim has found that Pat's house does comply with building regulations. So how come Pat and his neighbours can still hear so much of each other's lives?
The current building regulations don't really reflect the amount of noise that's in a modern day house. There's TVs, radios in every room. They go for hard floors, ceramic tiles, timber floors. All these elements tend to amplify noise in a room. I think it's fair to say that standards at the moment are quite low, and the world has got much noisier, and standards needs to be moved up in order to reflect the fact that both internally and externally to your house, the world is a lot noisier than it used to be.
There are no legal limits in statute, but there are codes of practice and British standards that we would have regard to in determining noise nuisance. The existing legislation is the Environmental Protection Agency Act 1992, and that contains a definition of what constitutes a noise nuisance.
Design and layout is another factor affecting the sound between houses. In the case of Pat's house, his sitting room is next to his neighbour's sitting room, and likewise bedrooms are adjoining neighbours' bedrooms, and this can accentuate sound. There is the other way with semi-Ds. These houses are hallway to hallway, where the hall, stairs and landing creates a buffer space between the two houses, and this can help. It's too late for Pat to change the layout of the house, but he can bring in the sound specialist to insulate the party wall. David, when you come into a house, a typical house with a party wall, blockwork, where do you start?
When we arrived here, Duncan, what we found was this house was actually to a higher specification than what we would normally find. So there was a plasterboard dabbed onto the wall, and on the back of the plasterboard there was a cork layer. And that cork layer would normally help absorb the impact noises. And also there's a scratch coat of sanded cement placed over the blockwork, which may help cover up any holes that might be in the blockwork itself.
Right. So what do you do?
Well, basically, Duncan, the first procedure would be, as I said, clean off the wall, prepare the wall if there's any obvious defects to remedy them. And then basically we use this acoustic batten. This helps us achieve decoupling the new surface from the existing party wall. 2 MDF battens run parallel to one another, and they're held together with high density rubber, which is flexible in itself. And these absorb the shock waves of sound and weaken them as they travel through.
To fix this now, you don't want a screw fixing going all the way through here and sound transmitting through the screw.
Exactly, yeah. We infill the battens with medium density rock wool insulation to absorb the airborne noise. And then over that, as the last layer of resistance, there's 2 layers of a high density sound check plasterboard, and the second layer overlaps the previous layer's joints, because that's the weak point of the existing first layer of plasterboard.
The sound insulation must continue through the first floor construction, the partition wall, and through the dry lining of the external wall to meet the blockwork. Sockets are also fitted in the floor as opposed to cutting holes for new power points through which sound can travel. So how long does a job like this take to do from start to finish?
Well, generally speaking, a standard 3-bedroom semi-detached home would take 1 week.
It's estimated that 1/3 of new houses don't comply with building regulations, and for another third, the standards are simply not good enough. Without having a test before you buy, you could be exposed to a lot of expense. So if you're buying a new house, my view is that the building regulations should extend to having a sound test carried out on all houses where there's a party wall before you buy the house. With existing houses, why not ask the neighbours what the sound levels are like between walls in their estate? But also you could get a sound test carried out before you buy the house, so at least you know how it performs, and it could save you an awful lot of trouble later on. If you do find you have a problem, why not split the loss of space, the inconvenience, and of course the cost with your neighbour by making repairs at ground floor level in one house and tackling the first floor next door. Meanwhile, Pat is very pleased with the results of his upgrade.
The difference is just remarkable. All I can really hear now are very muted, low-level sounds, even when the people are playing their music at high volume. So that means an awful lot to me at the end of the day.